Okay, so I see there are people still coming in, but let's start anyway, just to respect the time of everybody. So I wanted to welcome all of you to our first Agile Afternoon Panel. I hope that it will be interesting, and I hope that we will have a lot of interesting things to hear and a lot of interesting topics to cover, questions to answer. So this is the first in a row. It's about Scrum Master role, expectations versus reality. Each week we will be doing this with some great people as we are doing today. The topic is, as I said, expectations versus reality, Scrum Master role in practice. So let me just tell you how this will work. So we sent you all the different topics that we were thinking about covering, but since there is a lot of things to talk about, you voted on Match About applications. So 4 topics have been chosen to cover today. Those 4 topics we will be talking about. After that, if we still have time, because we will do it in 1 hour, we will go to the next topics that were on the list. And after that, we will have a Q&A session where you have on Zoom, you have a QA section, and then you can send us some questions so we can answer them live. If we do not manage to cover all the questions will be answered afterwards. We will send them to you with mail or something like that. So maybe write down your questions while we'll have this talk, and then when we get to the Q&A session, you can send them to us. That's all. Yeah. During this talk, we will also have some polls. So please participate. We will ask you guys some questions, include you into this, and then we will see how it will work. I would like to welcome our panelists. Really glad that you could make and join us. So we have Melissa Boggs. She's a Chief Scrum Master. Hi, Melissa. We have Miljan Bajić. He's an organizational and agile coach. Hi, Miljan. And we have Zoran Vujkov as an agile coach and trainer. I hope you guys know him because we do a lot of things with him also. Yeah. So the topics that were chosen and voted with the most likes on our application was Scrum Master role in practice, what actually that is and how it's important to the team, what is the expectations from Scrum Master, and what is reality when it comes to practice, what are the obstacles that Scrum Master have in different organizational structures, and the most famous one, as I could see, how to do with resilient people, people who don't want to change. Melissa, but by your opinion, what actually is that role? So everybody is talking about that role. Everybody knows that that role exists. And then we hear a lot of questions. What actually does Scrum Master do? So why that role exists? So could you tell us your opinion? What actually is that, so people can hear?
Sure. So I am one that is always going to go back to the Scrum Guide, especially when it comes to these roles that really don't have context outside of the Scrum Guide. I mean, that's where it all came from, right? So for me, the Scrum Master has 3 roles. They are in service to the product owner, they're in service to the team, and they're in service to the organization. And that can look like a lot of different things. I can tell you what it's not. It is not a meeting scheduler. It is not a project manager, though certainly there are some skills that folks who were once project managers could bring to that role. So I do want to make that distinction, but it is very different from a project manager. They hold space in the team. They help the team understand how they can work better together. They help the organization understand how to better support the team through the different systems and culture and structure of the organization. And then they help the product owner better understand how to keep that backlog in a prioritized, and value-driven state.
Yep. And Zoran, what do you think is the most important thing that Scrum Master is supposed to do? So why is he an important figure in the team?
Okay, I mean, why is important? To be honest, I ask this question myself every day almost, because there is so many challenges around that role, and I think the main reason for challenges about this role is this role doesn't fit very well with the traditional way of developing software. So it's not easy, as Melissa tried to explain. It's not easy to explain everything what Scrum Master do, or Scrum Master does, should I say. But it's very important to understand that the company who wants to implement Scrum itself will not work if you don't have anyone who can help organization to implement Scrum. And one of the most important thing about implementing Scrum, and that what I found quite interesting, is that lots of company and teams in particular expect the Scrum would solve them all the problems which they have. It's actually the other way around. The Scrum is actually showing you what doesn't work and expect from you, or your team, or your management, or organization to address these things. So the Scrum Master is a specific role which helps company implement Scrum properly. Because if you implement Scrum properly, this is just the layer. This is like just basic framework. On the top of that, you should add additional things regarding of your challenges which you have. So that's why we're talking about framework rather than method. And framework itself should be flexible according to an environment. But what is not flexible is that you have 3 roles, 5 events, and 3 artifacts. And as Melissa said, Scrum Master is really there to help with team to become self-organized, because there is this strange belief if you put a group of people together, they suddenly become a team. Yeah, that's not the case, and it'll take a while, and that's why we're talking about leaders. Someone who should help this team go into these phases of forming, storming, norming, performing. The Scrum Master is there to help with, how to better the develop product, how to make team more efficient. Scrum Master is there to really try to find a way to improve. Some would say speed up this team, make this team more productive. But the Scrum Master focus is just the team, it's not the individuals itself, because Scrum Master certainly is not there to educate individual software engineers to become better software engineer itself, because that requires some different skills. So there is this question about, okay, what's the difference between Scrum Master and team lead? And that's the typical question which I get all the time. Mm-hmm. And for me, that's a kind of collision between 2 kind of worlds. One world which is traditional way of delivering. I mean, you have a team lead who is responsible for all team, managing all the work of the team, being responsible for everything. And that usually works when you have functionally oriented teams with a similar skill set. Yeah. But having functionally oriented teams had so many challenges: integration, synchronization, alignment, prioritization, and etc. And that's why Scrum and Agile introduced concept of cross-functional teams. So in that teams, you have people with different skill set and different expertise, and you want all of them to be there so that team can independently deliver things. So Scrum Master is helping that team to work together with different skill set. So how to help each other, how to support each other, how to communicate properly, how to focus on the quality, how to have better requirements, how to reduce cycle time or time which takes you to deliver certain things, how to remove impediments and waste. Everything will slow down the team. So as you can see, this role it's not easy to put on paper. It's not even easy. I think all 3 of us would kind of take a while to describe this role. Yeah. But I think the main thing is that if you want to implement Scrum, you should have someone, that's why it's called Scrum Master, yeah? It's Master for Scrum, who should help you to implement Scrum by the book, by the Scrum guide. And you should start with that. And from that, you should learn things which you need to address to improve. And that's, in short, my answer to your question.
Yeah. And when, if we can, I don't know, pick like 3 main activities that Scrum Master do, Miljan, what would you say that the 3 or 2, 3, 4 activities that are the main activities of a Scrum Master that they should do?
So I'll start with one to kind of build on what Melissa and Zoran said. So if you look at the Scrum Master and the role of the Scrum Master, think about 2 gears first. You know, one is the product owner that defines usually the what, the other one is the team that defines the how, right? So the Scrum Master is the oil between the 2 gears, right? So if you ask me to define 2, 3 things, yeah, I can define and say, hey, you know, how are you helping them deliver value if they're working together, right? So depending on the context, it could be different things. But like Melissa said, you know, in a sense, you know, how are you serving first the team, right? How are you serving? And just to add to what Zoran said too, I think I work a lot with individuals too, because individuals, it's not just team, right? As a team, you have to work at it, but different people have different needs. So as a Scrum Master, you're responsible to understand, how do I help, you know, Ivan, because he's always thinking about himself, let's just say. And he doesn't work well as a team, and there's probably reasons. So I need to understand you as a Scrum Master and help coach you individually so you can actually help the team. So if, you know, so that's one thing where as a Scrum Master, you have to look at the whole dynamic of a team. You have to look at their perspectives and say, how do I actually get this group of people to work together? So that's the social. One of the aspects of a Scrum Master role is social risk. Yep. Do these people hate each other? do they like to go for a beer together, right? Or whatever choice of drink, coffee. That's one thing, right? So how well are you managing or helping teams, not you, but helping teams manage the social risk? And this is what Zoran was saying, as far as people confuse, like, you know, the Tuckman's models, like, you know, in a sense, like forming, storming, norming. I think I got him right.
I think you did.
But like, it's a state, right? So teams can go into a performing state and something could happen and they could digrade to storming, right? So it's not, you know, so it's constantly looking at the team as a Scrum Master and saying, you know, how do I help them in a performing, you know, to stay in a performing state?
Yeah.
The other part is the delivery part, right? As a product owner, and this is kind of what Melissa alluded with the, you know, serving the product owner and business. Like, how are you helping, you know, product owner manage the risk of, hey, you know, are we building the right thing? You know? Yeah. And then obviously the organization. So.
Yeah. Let's see how much attendees, who is a Scrum Master or not. I will just launch a quick poll just to see if you all can answer the poll, just to see how much of you are a Scrum Masters and how much are some other roles. So I launched the polling. So let's we will let you guys just vote for some time, just to see what is the structure of you attendees here. Okay, so it's pretty, yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you guys saw, there is yes, no, and let's say I am, plus some other roles. So that is yeah, that is what I hear a lot. So basically people do tend to be Scrum Masters plus product owners, or Scrum Master plus something else, or yeah, I'm a Scrum Master, but in a different way, I'm also a team lead or not. So it's pretty much tied so far. I will just let you have 10 more seconds to vote, and then we will see how things are here. So basically, yeah. Okay. So I will share my results with you all. So to see who is, so basically most of the people here are not Scrum Masters. So I'm glad that you all are interested in this topic and that you want to learn what it is. and a lot of you are Scrum Master, but also something else. Great, cool.
So this is quite interesting because there are many questions which you get from the companies. One of them being, do I need full-time Scrum Master? Yeah.
Yeah.
Second one is, can some of my developers be a Scrum Master? There is another question about, should Scrum Master be a technical person? Yeah, because developers are so single-minded. If you're not better than them in technology, how you can be influencing them? Can Scrum Master and Product Owner be the same person? Do I actually need Scrum Master and that kind of stuff? Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm not actually surprised that many people actually doing, let's say I'm doing Scrum Master role, but I'm actually doing something else, you know.
Yeah.
Guess what? We all doing Scrum. And for me, one of the main reasons why so many companies and teams are struggling is mainly in role of Scrum Master. I think in my experience, main differentiator between successful Scrum team and unsuccessful, when I say successful, I mean team who can deliver faster the product, deliver better product, and be more efficient, is in role of Scrum Master. Yeah.
Yeah, and what do Zoran people usually expect from a Scrum Master? Or what do they expected in the teams that you worked with, or where were you a Scrum Master? So
yeah, this is actually an excellent question, because it looks to me that it's easy to choose a product owner, because the product owner is usually related to product manager. I'll have product manager, oh guess I'm now a product owner, and I have no project manager. Okay, so what Scrum Master do? Okay, he's maybe a project manager, or actually he's doing everything else as well. I mean, cooking, making coffee is another one, you know, Jira admin or whatever tool admin, it's Scrum Master. So actually Scrum Master is doing, in the eyes of everyone in the team, is doing everything, you know, everything else which team or product owner does not do, you know, which is kind of not surprised, but you know, it shows again that this role is really difficult to map to existing roles, and that's why why some Scrum Masters are really struggling.
Yeah.
Well, and there's such a balance between doing everything for the team and helping the team understand how to do it for themselves. And I see often, you know, there's this term servant leadership that is tied to Scrum Mastery, but servant leadership doesn't mean servant. It means servant leadership. You know, it means,
it doesn't mean serving your servants.
Right. And it doesn't mean serving coffee. Now, yes, there are probably some instances where, you know, it would be appropriate for the Scrum Master to bring coffee to, you know, help everyone's morale. But, you know, they're really there to help the team understand how to self-organize. And while removing impediments, if coffee is an impediment, is part of the job for sure, it's not always the Scrum Master that's removing the impediments. I mean, at times, the right thing is for the Scrum Master to help the team understand how they can overcome the impediment themselves. And that makes them a stronger team.
Yeah. And one of the interesting discussion which I usually have is that when I say typically 2 KPIs I have for Scrum Master. One is to everything what anyone asks you, you need to ask your team. That's number one. And number two, you should do as much as possible to make yourself redundant to the team. So what Melissa just saying, you actually help team realizing that they need to do lots of other things. So becoming less dependent, team less depending on you. Yeah. So over the time, you're not needed that much in terms of team. But there is the other aspect, which is organization. And there is a product owner, which we mentioned at the beginning, which requires attention from Scrum Master. So you should really try to teach your team to take ownership and responsibility for many, many things.
Yeah. Do maybe guys have some interesting story when it comes to what did some teams expect from their Scrum Masters? Okay, we heard making coffee. I also, when we worked with some companies, I heard something like, oh, it's the guy who writes something, some charts and show them to us all the time. Also, I heard, I don't know, it's the guy who facilitates our dailies, and that's it. So maybe you have some stories interesting that you had in your work. I don't know, Miljan, do you have some kind of interesting thing that you encountered?
Sure, I have a couple. I think I mentioned two at least. So there was one time, at least it reminded me when Melissa mentioned coffee. So I worked with one team that was on the East Coast of the United States and another one on the West Coast, and they were just starting out, and one of the challenges was like when to set up the meeting because of the time differences. And at both locations, you had people and teams that were pretty stubborn about their ways, and we couldn't find a good time. And this was more like, small custom software development shops. So they had a lot of latitude as far as speaking back in a sense and saying, hey, we don't want to schedule our retrospectives during lunchtime, right? So if it's a lunchtime on the East Coast, it's, usually morning on the West Coast. And one of the things that I did is say, what would it take, to have a meeting during lunch? And eventually, I ended up and talked to leadership. We bought him sushi for lunch. And that was one of the things that got people at least to be open, right? And they, and one of the things I think that I've tried in the past, and when I coach Scrum Masters, is try to get people to make smaller commitments, right? So when I did that, it was like, hey, can we just try it for 1 week? And we'll buy you sushi of your choice just to see how bad it is to have a meeting during lunch, right? Yeah. And most people are open to having and trying things something once. And use that as an opportunity for people to experience. And then after that, we had a retrospect while eating sushi, saying, how bad is this, and try to get people to actually be open by experiencing things and doing rather than saying, oh, pushing back or saying, hey, you have to be, right? You have to be there. Because this is one thing that we talk about in Agile or just in general in change, coercing or forcing people to do. It's easy for the management could have easily said, no, you have no option. You have to go to this meeting, right? That's one way to lead. That's one way to kind of show up, or to what Melissa said, creating a space for people to decide and experience things and make things. There was another thing that at this other company, they had like beer o'clock, and people would start drinking every Friday, I don't know, around 3 o'clock, 3:30, and there was beer of choice or drinks. But what happened early on with this team is they moved into cross-functional teams, and essentially developers would develop, testers would test. So you still had, what we call, a lot of specialists within the Scrum team. And testers would get pissed, man. Testers will get pissed on Fridays because everybody's drinking, having fun, and they're still testing sometimes even through the weekend. And one of the things in that instance that I did as a Scrum Master and said, how can we, because it got pretty bad. It got to a point where, within the team, testers were saying, like we're spending weekends, we're spending, time away from our families to do our art, and then, everybody else is enjoying their weekends. So we talked about what needs to be true in order for everybody to enjoy the beer o'clocks on Friday, and the question of what needs to be true in order for this to happen is one of the powerful questions that you as a Scrum Master can use, because then it gets people thinking, it gets them solutioning. So one of the things that they came up is how they sequence the work. In that instance, they still had silos within the Scrum team in the sense of specialists, but they decided to do smaller work at the beginning, bigger chunks in the middle, and then at the end it was all hands-on to test it, so everybody could enjoy the beer o'clock on that second Friday.
Yeah.
So as a Scrum Master, thinking about these things and getting people to, you know, come up through experiences with their own conclusions is something that Scrum Master is really there to help facilitate.
Yeah, let's see what do people think about expectations. What are the first thing that they expect from their Scrum Masters, or what is expected from them if they are a Scrum Master? So we saw there are a number of Scrum Masters, and all of them are a number of which aren't. So I will share another poll just to see what people think. So there is I put some different expectations. I hope you can guys all see them. So there is one when it comes to making a coffee. So please do vote just to see.
Make it on there?
Sorry?
Sushi didn't make it on there?
Yeah, sushi didn't make it, yeah. Just to see what probably you guys have more than one expectation, of course, but what is the first thing that comes to your mind when we talk about expectations from Scrum Masters? So no making coffee so far, I can tell you that. That's good. So yeah, there, as you can see, a number of expectations. Oh, come on, guys. Some of you must think that Scrum Masters should make a coffee. Yeah. Okay, I can tell you that it's pretty good so far. I'm glad that I'm seeing these results. I will share you this in a couple of seconds. Yeah. Okay, I'm ending the poll now and sharing the results with you to see. Yeah, so we can see that the most of the viewers said that the expectation from a Scrum Master is to try to maximize the Scrum team's performance and productivity. So I think it's pretty well. What do you guys think?
You shared with us something which we haven't seen. So can you share on the screen?
I didn't share.
I haven't seen, so maybe.
Yeah, I didn't see the results. I just saw the, yeah.
Okay, so I don't know why you are not seeing this. I hope that the viewers can see, but the 41% said that the expectations from the Scrum Master is to try to maximize the Scrum team's performance and productivity. And the second one is to coach the development team in self-organization and cross-functionality. Are those things happening in practice? What would you say?
I think it must happen because that's one of the main responsibilities of Scrum Master. And in my experience and in what I see is that the data are usually ones which are good allies to the Scrum Master. So collecting some good data and sharing with your team and addressing some interesting patterns and challenges in behavior and work are important. For example, what about if you claim you finish your sprint is done, you release, let's say you release your software, and all of a sudden there is a bunch of bugs coming back from your customer. So the question we should ask, why we have there so many bugs, why the customer needs to discover them, yeah? And yeah, we got results now.
Okay.
So there is a teeny line between being someone who is presenting metrics and results and data for the sake of it, and someone who will use that and help team becoming better, yeah, and optimize their performance and they were working. Because if you don't have data to support some of your discoveries, you know, guess what? Then team will challenge that immediately. But even if you have results, even if you have data, sometimes it's really difficult to explain this to the people that, you know, for example, if you have developers, and let's say you have someone who's doing testing, yeah? Why should I help testers testing a software and validating software, particularly in the last few days of the sprint,
Yeah.
or what the tester should do in the first few days in the sprint, and what I should do if I'm finished my work. Should I pick another one or help someone else to finish, and that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think I'm happy the results as you presented.
Yeah.
Most difficult challenge is how you do it, and my advice is that if you need to collect some interesting data, things like cycle time, flow efficiency, number of bugs which you have, number of bugs you discover during sprint, after sprint, things like do you have a deployment pipeline? Can you deploy a software at least to your test environment daily? Do you have a health check of your software daily, and that kind of stuff? And that's probably one of the interesting journey of Scrum Master, because at the beginning you're focusing on the Scrum framework itself. So more facilitation, more explaining benefit of each event, more explaining how to self-organize, helping product owner with the defining requirements, etc., etc. Over the time, and when team becomes better with all this, you start focusing more organization on, particular on the quality of delivery of your team, yeah, software of your team. So yeah.
Yeah. And sorry. Yeah.
Can I add to that and actually just answer your earlier question about the results? I would actually take a slightly not a different position as you, Zoran, but from the results, that it's not actually about productivity and performance, but it's actually about delivering value, and that all of the other things that were in that list. So if we just change the one that everyone voted for to say delivering value, then everything else on that list is actually in support of that. Mm-hmm. And so one of the most important things we can do is help teams understand and help the product owner understand how to talk in terms of value. And you can't do that without talking in terms of your customer and customer centricity. Whoever the organization is, or whatever it is that you're trying to deliver. For me, one of the kernels, like the main points of Scrum, was actually focusing on what the customer wants and not just what we think that they want. Mm-hmm. And so talking about delivering value, and then all of those other things, everything that's in the Scrum Guide for both the product owner, the Scrum Master, and the team is around supporting that. And it's kind of what I think you were saying as well, Zoran, but wrapping it up a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. The delivering value is key, but I think that at the same time is delivering this value in the right way and fast is equally important. So I actually very much like what you said. I think that's what probably missing from my discussion. So absolutely focus on value, focus on doing that quickly and doing with quality. I think that's a recipe for success generally.
Right. Well, and everything you were talking about in terms of cycle time and just time to delivery shortens that feedback loop. I mean, the faster that we have put something in front of real people, the faster that we know if we're going down the right track, and the less risk we have in delivering something that is just not at all what people want.
Yeah. And do things, are things the same, or probably not, but in different organization, in smaller, bigger companies, different organizational structures, how things are different when we talk about delivering value? How do people think about that? For example, if we have a smaller company or if we have a bigger company, Miljan, do you have something that you would say is different when we're working with different organizational structures? And what is the thing that Scrum Masters should focus on when they work with, I don't know, bigger teams, or if there is a company with, I don't know, a huge structure, or if we have a small team and everybody's involved in everything? How would you?
Yeah, I mean, definitely the organizational architecture structure kind of has a huge impact. And for instance, with smaller companies, it's a lot easier. And this goes back to everything that we've said so far, which is, as a Scrum Master, there's a huge shift. And we haven't talked about the context here, where does Scrum Master live? And I use the, orange from Lalou's stuff, but in general, there are two modes, right? So the first thing that the biggest misconception is that the Scrum Master should be driving a lot of this. And what I see in a lot of organizations, that doesn't matter if it's large or small, is this misconception of the Scrum Master responsible for this. And most people, when I talk to developers or anybody on a Scrum team, I guess, it's like Scrum Masters things with this la land. All they care about is like, you know, what Zoran is saying, like, you know, cycle time, all this. I don't give a shit about it. You know, it's like, I'm just trying to get stuff done. So as a Scrum Master, we become so obsessed with the stuff that we know, and nobody else in a lot of organizations gives a crap about what we do. So the whole point here, the whole point of Scrum itself is how do we deal with complexity, right? So Scrum is trying to address that. So with that, it's essentially like the responsibility and the need to address and manage things spreads out, right? So if people don't want to take that, and this is where the issue is, not necessarily to the organization, the organizational issue is with the authority. So how much authority do I give to people, right? But if people don't want the authority, like, hey, I'm responsible for, it's not just Zoran that should care about the cycle time, it's the whole team, right? And what Melissa said about the feedback loops. But if people don't give a damn, then so it's twofold. One is people first wanting to step into that role. So for instance, a developer that is open-minded in the sense that, hey, it's not just about developing. I have to look at things systematically. And yes, the big part that I do is write code. But I also have to think about the feedback loops, the cycle time. How are we delivering value? If we just assume that that's the Scrum Master's role, then there's a disconnect. And then the structural part is where even if you have people that actually want to do that, if you know, they're not allowed to. And that happens a lot in large organizations where it's like, just do your job, right? Or different contexts where, like, if you're outsourcing, and this goes both for product owner as well as the Scrum Master, if you're part of, a lot of times what we're doing is masking traditional roles. And I think Zoran, Americanizing his name or whatever you call. But it's putting just the labels. Like, you know, I think, you know, saying like, oh, you know, what is that? We don't have a project manager. Let's just, you know, have Scrum Master play both project manager and Scrum Master role. So there are obviously, yes, there are the size of organization and the way the organization's governance is set up is different. Because here we're talking about team and a couple of things. We haven't talked Scrum and how do you actually look at the broader ecosystem or system of organization and governance. So.
Yeah, and what is maybe Melissa, your biggest obstacle that you faced when you worked as a Scrum Master? For example, if we have a huge team, you have a management who is not, let's say, involved in the team's work. So you probably faced some challenges with them while talking to them. Did they understand everything that you're saying to them when trying to implement some good practices that Scrum carries? So maybe you could share what are the obstacles that you faced?
I think this is where many of us start to grow from Scrum Master to, you know, larger organizational coach, because there's only so far that your team can get if your team has dependencies on all of these other departments or areas that just don't understand it, right? That just don't understand trying to work differently. And that becomes even more challenging when that's all they know. It's not their fault. They're not trying to not understand. They're just doing their jobs. And, you know, sometimes what you're bringing to the table is a distraction to them. I was definitely in situations where, because, you know, when people don't understand something, then they're almost going to villainize it. They're going to make it the problem rather than, like Zoran said, no, it's actually exposing the problems that we already had. So, I mean, I remember sitting in a meeting once with a senior VP and a project had not gone well. And Scrum really had nothing to do with it. I mean, truly, other than it did reveal it faster, right? Like this project was going to fail. And because we were doing sprint reviews, we learned much sooner that it was going to fail, but all anyone could see was, oh my gosh, it's going to fail. And you brought this different thing, whatever this different thing I didn't understand was, you brought this Scrum thing. And I mean, he looked directly at me and told me that it was my fault that the project had failed. And if I stopped at that and had said, you know, oh gosh, I'm going to throw my hands up in the air and give up, then I wouldn't have grown. The team wouldn't have grown. The VP himself would not have grown. I'm not sure he did, but I'd like to think he did. So, you know, taking those challenges and those opportunities where there's a cultural clash between those who are trying to kind of work differently and those who are just trying to do their jobs and have no idea what's going on, those are opportunities to kind of open it up further. But it's super easy to get discouraged in that moment and be like, yeah, you're right. You know, even if you don't even think it's your fault, you're right. It was my fault. Like, move on. But taking that opportunity is a big chance to do something bigger.
And is, let's say, like lack of information, of lack of understanding what we are implementing, is that also an obstacle? Maybe Zoran, you can tell us, is that also an obstacle when it comes to smaller companies, or is there something else besides that smaller companies encounter when we talk about obstacles that we have when we're trying to implement something like Scrum?
In my experience, I wouldn't exactly say that working with smaller companies is easy, sorry, but in some way it's easier, because usually when you have a small company, you have management more prone towards focusing on delivering value, better understanding why they're using Scrum, what's the purpose. Mm-hmm. And there is no many roles affected by Scrum, because one thing which Scrum brings, for example, comparing to Kanban, who starts with what you have in terms of roles, in terms of process, and gradually identifying obstacles and improving that. Scrum starts with completely new things. You have framework, you have roles, you have events, you have artifacts. So you're changing things and you're affecting some people. And you have a small organization, you have less people to be affected, you know, with that, and they're easier to find them how they can help team delivering, as Melissa said, better value faster, getting faster feedback. It's much easier to do that. In a big organization, usually you have this hierarchy organization. It's much easier to hide, let's put it that way. And usually what you have at Scrum is this kind of notion of agile transformation. You have this, you heard that term, agile transformation is coming and get your way and you help you with everything, you know. And to do something like that, this really requires lots of support from the top, you know, because my experience with big companies, it's easier to address and help people on the front who are close to delivering to become more agile and deliver better product faster than focusing on the whole organization. And because I asked a few times, CEO company, what do you want to do with agile? What kind of problem we're addressing? Tell me. Well, actually, they asked me, how do I know that in 6 months' time or 12 months' time, my company will have better results? How do we know that we're justifying paying you? And I usually I said, well, usually I'm saying, okay, that's an excellent question, but tell me, how do you measure your success now? And I can assure you that in 6 months or 12 months' time, we'll do better. And usually some companies don't have anything. Some companies really have this kind of rigid way of collecting data and et cetera, et cetera. So with the complexity of organization, as Miljan saying, there is a complexity of you need to, and Melissa is mentioning, you can really be struggling everywhere, you know, and that's why I think it's with big companies, one person cannot do the job. With the smaller company, it's much faster to get better results quicker, much faster you can justify your work and you can compare. And I think originally And my understanding, Scrum was meant to be like used for one team or few teams. Let's put that way. I still remember I think 2 Agile conferences ago when someone asked Alistair Cockburn about how to use Agile successfully in an organization or scale up Agile in an organization. Is there any example of that? And he said no. And he just swiftly moved to another question. And that tells you a lot, because with organization, first thing we need to combat is the organization culture. And I don't believe in this concept of hybrid between traditional and Agile. And you need to really change organization mindset. And that's a painful job and requires lots of time.
Yeah.
And can I suggest, there are lots of interesting questions in this Q&A session. So I would really encourage people to keep asking questions. I think we should allow some time to address some of them.
Yeah, we will go. I'm also seeing the questions. We will go to the Q&A soon. Just I wanted to, we were now talking about, okay, what are the obstacles when it comes to implementing Scrum or implementing some Agile way of working. And I also heard that you guys mentioned there are people who just are not maybe ready to change or do not want to change or that stuff. So I'm sure that you all, and as do I, know people and have people in their team who are, let's say, not prepared to change. So how to deal with those people? How do you guys deal with those people who are not willing to change and go to Scrum or some other way of working in the team? Do you have some interesting cases, and how did you deal with them? Okay, Melissa.
I'll start. I don't think anyone wakes up in the morning and says, I want to go to work and be difficult today.
Yeah.
And so my first position with someone like that is going to be to try to understand why. Because they likely, especially if I'm, coming in from the outside, or if I'm a new Scrum Master on the team, or just new to the team in general, there may be things that I don't know. And so a willingness to just listen to those people. And in doing so, you may hear some misconceptions that they have that you can help them to, have a better understanding, or it may just help you better understand, where they're coming from, and you can share the value of all of it with them from their perspective. Like, there's an incredible amount of empathy that is required when you're coming in saying, here's this brand new thing, and people are resistant to that. Like, of course they're going to be, to a certain degree.
And Melissa, you bring up a good point in the sense of, like, a good Scrum Master is a good coach, right? So a lot of Scrum Masters are not aware, or might not be aware of, like, what does coaching mean, right? In the sense of, is it like sports coaching, professional coaching? So just even awareness around coaching. But really what Melissa is saying is, like, a good Scrum Master is a good coach where you can actually understand. Most people, I would, say, Melissa, some people do wake up. I'm kidding, but in a sense, it's trying to understand and empathizing with people and seeing the perspective that they're looking at things is a huge part of the Scrum Master role that I would say, like, a lot of people don't fully are aware of, like, how it can help. And coaching is something that every team member on a Scrum team should be aware of, and we can coach each other, and it's much easier, much better to understand how to solve things when we are coming from that perspective. A lot of times, I guess. So.
Yeah, I also prepared.
If I want to add one thing, I mean, empathy is very important. What they mentioned, I would say, I'll quote Jeff Watts, who said, "Empathic listening is extremely important." Because you want to be a good coach, you need to really listen and try to find why the people thinking certain ways. If you want to change that kind of behavior, if you want to influence, you really need to understand some kind of root cause of that thinking. Yeah. But at the same time, I'd like to quote Jürgen Appelo, who said once, he doesn't believe that people resist to change. And I kind of was thinking at that point, I'm not sure, but what he was saying that people resist change which they don't understand. It's all about change management. If I don't understand why certain things change, what we want to achieve, and what's in it for me, what's expectation from me, and what I should do, guess what? People will resist. And unfortunately, if we take this situation where we are now, yeah, lots of people resist change because they don't want to stay at home. They want to have a kind of, let's say, normal life. It's very difficult for some people, and people repeat why we're doing this, what's they want to achieve, and what's expectation. And similar with the Scrum Master role, it's exactly the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
You touched upon some really important, Zoran. I think that's one thing that's underestimated as far as change, right? We all will change if we all see it in a sense of like, what's the benefit of that change? And different people on a team, on a Scrum team, could have different reasons. So that's why I said you have to understand, and this is where it goes to personal values, beliefs, and kind of worldviews. Because you can have a group of people that have different needs within the team, and how do you actually align them towards a common goal? That's one of the responsibilities of Scrum Master, understanding the psychological side of each team member and trying to help them align with their views. And a lot of times that's the hard part, because you have a bunch of random people, usually in Scrum and cross-functional team, you have people with different views, different perspectives, different beliefs, and trying to help everybody see from their perspective the benefit is very difficult and takes time.
Yeah.
That is assuming that you have stable teams too.
Yeah. There are more definitely different approaches when it comes to how to deal with those kind of people. And to me, it's normally not to accept change if you do not understand what it is and how it will benefit to you. But let's see how people think that, how do they approach to these kind of things. So I'm sharing another poll just so you can tell us, how do you handle these kind of things. So there are different approaches. Some of them are what we talked about. Some of them are different, but let's see what you guys think. So I hope you all are seeing the poll. Let's see what you think. So of course there are some other approach, and that is really fine. I expect it, but these are some that came up to my mind. And please be honest. Yeah, I know there are some of you who say you must do it this way. I know. Be honest. It's an anonymous voting. Yeah, so far people are talking to their teams, which is really, really cool. Okay, I will end it now. I see some more votes. Yeah, let's stop it now. So please tell me if you see the results. The last time there's something, yeah, you see the results, okay. So as the results show, people do talk about the things they do not like in the change, and people are willing to talk and to see why the change is happening and what it brings to us. Could you comment on the results? But we can see that people do think what you guys said, as if I'm not wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just posted a couple of links that I've written on this topic, especially the second link, accepting what it is. But essentially, like, as a Scrum Master, how do you help people accept the current state? So essentially, how do we help people understand and see that the current state is something that you want to move past, right? Because that's the way that we change. So there are multiple different ways through coaching, through different reflection and different techniques that you can do that. But ultimately, people change when they realize the current way of thinking is no longer valid. So how do you help people see that?
Yeah.
That's the time that people say, okay, well, I want to, I see your point. I no longer have that feeling or thinking about that specific topic. And this is like, when I coach leaders and when I talk to organizations, people do want to change, but you have to help them through that process of accepting what already is, realizing that, hey, and we've done this. Anytime you think about past, life in past, things that you've changed, or you no longer have the same belief. I know, like, my wife gets pissed at me for certain things. And for instance, I used to be a lot more emotional, right? And I'm not that emotional anymore. So I can't go back understanding like how the whole emotional intelligence and that helps me make better decisions. So there are certain things that I no longer, even if I strongly believed in, let's just say 5 years ago, today just don't identify with me.
Yeah.
So it's how do you help people go through that process of saying, yeah, I realize it, but I no longer associate with that.
Yeah.
And one example is, I work with a lot of developers who have been developers for 20, 30 years. And they associate themselves, or project managers, same thing, like in America or United States with larger insurance companies, banks, there are people that have been there for 20, 30 years. So like the identity is project manager, front-end developer. And that's who they are. That's the, so trying to help them identify that, hey, you're much more than that. But you can't just say you're much more than that. They have to come to that realization, right? So that's where the trick is.
Yeah. Okay, should we go on to questions? Zoran, you mentioned there are some interesting questions. Did you see some that you would like to point out?
I think we have 13 questions. I think we can address them all.
Yeah.
Let's
sure.
start from the top, should we say?
Yeah, sure. So first question from Vladimir. I don't know if this is a question. Zoran said the developers are single-minded and require that you are better at technology. Is it really developers' characteristic?
Okay, so maybe I very well, so I take this back. What I wanted to say is that to be able to influence people who are very technical, and let put that way, everyone who works in software is very intelligent people, and a typical picture of people who are doing their job is not like the most outgoing people. Yeah, they're very, very specific in their way of thinking, and you need to win them over. You need to really kind of show some credibility and that kind of stuff. So there is a question about, should Scrum Master be a really technical person to be able to help team, everything what we discussed so far? I mean, we were talking about empathy, we were talking about psychological profile, we were talking about that kind of stuff. On the other hand, we were talking about some engineering practices, we were talking about some things related to efficiency and that kind of stuff. So there is a question how you can for example influence team to have continuous integration if you can't explain what's continuous integration for and why we need that, yeah, that kind of thing. So my personal view is that Scrum Master really needs to understand all this, need to have good knowledge of that. Does not necessarily need to be a let's say software engineer, but per se, but there is some other aspect of what we discuss, this empathy and soft skills, if you like, and that kind of stuff, and that's not natural to people who are more technical, and that's what I was talking about. So it's not really just developers, it's lots of people who are this knowledge-based industry, where very intelligent people, and you need really to get could build trust with them. You really need to show credibility in what you're talking. It's not only about, as I said, about empathy and teams formation. It's about a technical side of that as well.
Yeah, Melissa, yeah.
Sorry, if I can get down to the the root of what you were saying, I completely agree. I will say we are in a time where not every team is a software team. You know, I have 7 teams at Scrum Alliance that are not software teams. They have software developers in them, but they're not software teams. So my Scrum Masters in that situation, they don't necessarily need to know how to put together a, CDCI pipeline, but they do need to be able to explain the value of being able to deliver quickly once something is ready, and then be able to listen to the people on the team who understand how to do that. I would have completely agreed with you 100% several years ago. I have a technical background, although here's the funny thing. You can have a technical background, but if you're not using it every day, it's outdated anyway, right? Like I got my IT degree, but it helps me only in principle. And so there's a lot of things as a Scrum Master that it's like, how do you get down to like the very core principle of whatever that practice is and help them understand that, so that then they can, take that and apply it to whatever it is that you're trying to help them understand. So that was a yes and.
Yeah, I think you raised a fair point, because lots of these days Scrum is not only about IT. I was talking specifically about software engineering. There are lots of Scrum outside of IT. But my point is that if you work in any industry, and if you really don't understand how that industry works, what kind of disciplines in that industry, what kind of processes are, and that kind of thing, you would struggling to influence that people. But if I imply that you need to have a technical background, that wasn't my point. I was trying to say you really need to broaden your skills in terms of, if you're doing software engineering, you really need to know discipline of software engineering. You not necessarily need to be a programmer, and someone who is DevOps who needs to put, let's say, a deployment pipeline in place. But you really need to understand why we're doing that to be able to influence others. That thing.
And I think that's where, just to kind of add to what you say, it comes down to influence. So in Serbia, like influencing people, because again, going back to their views and perspectives, might be that you're an expert or you have awareness of their domain. In some areas, I work with some teams here in the United States where like they don't care, they're open to, but you have to influence them in other ways. So I think that's one key thing, going back to, as a Scrum Master, understanding how you influence people. In that instance, you might have, and I work with people where you do have to understand the technical knowledge, and in some you have to influence them different ways. So it just depends. And
yeah, cool, thanks. There is a question: is Scrum Master a Jira admin also? Because some companies think that it's useful that Scrum Master is also tracking experts for software bugs, and how to handle this situation if they think it's a Jira admin.
Oh yes, how many times I heard that. I don't know why they said Jira admin can be Azure DevOps admin, whatever tools you're using. This comes to this, what Scrum Master is doing. If no one is doing admin of Jira, okay, Scrum Master will do it, because usually the process of production flow in the team is usually thing which Scrum Master is looking and trying to, to reshape it or change it or improve it, and that requires that you really know how to admin Jira to be able to do that. And I guess that's question coming from that. And usually when you start changing Jira, here you go, people start asking you questions, For example, one interesting thing for me, when I see the company who have not, you ask someone to give you permission. Why people need to ask permissions for having a tool? That's I don't understand. Because this for me is like command and control. So you need to really persuade me that you need the access to certain thing and certain kind of responsibilities before I allowing you to do that. For me, that's just nonsense. So, but that's another point of that you probably Scrum Master is collecting some data from Jira, which requires, or any tool, which requires you to know really that tool very well. So I think that's probably the reason why is that. If people don't see benefit of tool, there is a question about why we're using a tool. I'm a huge fan of boards, you know, and whoever knows me knows that whenever I go, always some boards come with me, and people start putting a sticky notes on a piece of paper and that kind of thing. But if you work in distributed environment, how you can do without tool? That's a simple question.
Yeah. Anything to add, Miljan, Melissa, regarding the? Okay. There is a question when it comes to product owner helping the Scrum Master, because we were talking about Scrum Master helping the team and helping the organization and that stuff. I would leave this question regarding product owner, because next week we will talk about product owner more and product itself. So Jovan, just let's try to skip this one for now.
I can answer quickly, in a sense, you know, the way that PO can help Scrum Master is if Scrum Master is serving the product owner can help Scrum Master understand how they can serve him better. So that's one of it.
I mean, one of the important characteristics of product owner to understand how Scrum works. Yeah. So if you don't support Scrum Master implementing Scrum, how would that work? That would never work. So I think that's probably one of the characteristics of product owner, one of important one. I won't say the most important, but important one. So there you go.
Can you be an Agile coach if you were not a Scrum Master in one team? Like Jose Mourinho, he was a lousy footballer, but a great coach. So this one's interesting. Can you be a good Agile coach if you were not a Scrum Master before that?
I think so.
Yeah.
I not necessarily agree with you. I think the problem with coaches is that for me, there is an old story about coaches versus Scrum Master. And I think Melissa was saying at the beginning, which I think it's very important, what Guy says, you influencing organization. And what I heard lots of things is that, oh, we have junior Scrum Master, but don't forget, we will have great experience, you know, global enterprise, whatever, Agile coach who will solve all problems. But Scrum Master, you just focus on the team, and that is everything else is a coach. I think so I'm not sure that's what Scrum creator wanted, for sure. For me, if you're losing, just let me just finish. If you're losing touch with the everyday work of Scrum Master, you know, as Melissa was mentioning about technology, I think the same thing applies. But I think coach is more than Scrum. It's all other frameworks, all other techniques. So I think the Scrum Master name is something which I found at the same time interesting, and same times can be obstacle for some people. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know some really good coaches that haven't played necessarily Scrum Master role. And one of the reasons that I say that is a lot of times you have project managers become Scrum Masters, and they still haven't made that mental shift or understanding, and they become coaches and they continue this. Some of the best coaches that I've seen come from development and like business analysis side. So the question is, can you see it? Yes, I've seen it, and it just depends on the person, right? If you have somebody that has been project managers for 30 years and in 2 years becomes a Scrum Master and an Agile coach, versus somebody that hasn't been influenced by that type of thinking for long and becomes a coach, having different type of background, I think is a lot of times easier, and it's easier to look at things differently. So it's, you know, same way that Jose became a coach, it depends. It really, you know, it's not, I don't think nothing is black and white. And I don't, you know, I never say yes or no in a sense, because yes, it happens, and it happens more often than we think.
Yeah.
I would say I would find it surprising. That doesn't mean impossible, but surprising if someone was an excellent Agile coach who had never been in an Agile team. Doesn't mean they have to be the Scrum Master.
Exactly.
But I think it would be very difficult to coach across an organization something that you had never experienced in some way. Like, again, you don't have to, there are lots of wonderful Agile coaches who came up through the product owner kind of route, or even the developer route. You know, there are definitely niches and coaches who are well known for being very technical coaches or very product facing coaches. So I don't think you have to be a Scrum Master, but I do think it would be very difficult to even just have the empathy required if you had never actually experienced that kind of shift, like you said, Miljan, yourself.
Yeah. Okay, we have a question here: how to evaluate the work of a Scrum Master, how to identify what needs to be improved, and how to self-evaluate. Maybe we can talk a bit.
I put a link in there. I think, one of the things is, this is a broader topic, but in a sense, like, what kind of skills do I need to have a Scrum Master? And I go back to Agile coaching competency framework. It's a good starting point if you want to look at some of the skills. And there's even some people that have created almost like skill assessments within that framework. So maybe we can, send a link after the webinar so people can look into it. But
yeah, I will send them, because you send it to us, to panelists, as I can see in the chat box. Maybe you can try to send them to all the participants. You have an options there beneath the chat. If not, I will send them later on to everybody.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just trying to answer some of the questions from different people.
I think if
yeah.
Sorry, go on, Melissa.
You can go, Zoran.
No, please.
Okay, I was just going to say, myself as a Scrum Master who coaches other Scrum Masters, I go back to the Scrum Guide over and over and over, because there's always something that we still have the opportunity to dive deeper into. It's funny where like the product owner section and the team section are one each, but if you look at the Scrum Master section, it's 3 sections in one because of the service to each of those areas. And so whenever I have Scrum Masters who are looking to self-evaluate and improve, we just go back to the Scrum Guide and, take that information and apply it to our context. How can we go deeper on these things?
Yeah.
Zoran.
That's exactly what I want to say. If you look at the guide, there's exactly almost like a checklist, things, what Scrum Master do. So if you want to really track, you need to check against that. And I think bottom line is that if team is delivering faster, better product value, Scrum Master is certainly contributing to that, but not necessarily only. So it's all about Scrum team. Yeah. So I think that's what Melissa said. That's what I wanted to say as well. So,
and then the other thing I tell people, like, it's great to go to the Scrum Guide, right? And Scrum Guide, in a sense, is a form of a recipe. And I tell people there's difference between cooks and chefs, right? So as a Scrum Master, you don't want to be a cook that just knows how to follow a recipe. You want to be a chef that understands, hey, if I don't have these ingredients, in my context, how do I make something tasteful, right? So as a Scrum Master, what you're doing to elevate yourself from being a cook to being a chef that understands how to do, and what is the implication? Like, a lot of these questions that we're asking, like, what happens if the Scrum Master is if developer is playing the Scrum Master role? What is the implication of that, right? Yeah. So a lot of that is understanding and getting better at a lot of this stuff and being open to that. So.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. We have a question: what to do when the development team is being put in a position to compromise the quality over quantity? I don't know if you guys see this question. So the context is the request from the software delivery comes from a senior management and is enforced by a hard deadline that is communicated to the client without consulting the development team first. I think we saw this a lot. So how to protect the development team in such case? Do you have some propositions?
There is a question. What do you mean by protecting team? Yeah, if if it's the company's decision to go with the product which has technical depth, yeah, that's a company decision. I think the most important thing in that scenario is that yes, you can go with technical depth for the product, but you need to have time to pay that technical debt off later, and that's the only thing what you can do. I mean, this is what some company call strategic technical debt. You know that there is a niche market, there is no, you know there is a deadline, you know that you need to be there. If you are not there, even with your greatest product, you miss the boat. You know, sometimes companies decide to go on that competition, even they know that there is a technical debt, but immediately after they release, they start paying that technical debt off and try to improve that. I mean,
and Zoran, I think
what you can do.
This goes to what you said earlier about helping show data. So a lot of teams don't even have a good way to explain, hey, you know, you want us to cut corners, here's, you know, what we're doing and what we're creating. So, hey, you know, are you willing to take that risk, right?
Sure.
A lot of times teams talk about subjectively about, hey, it's bad, we're creating technical debt, without ways to quantify it to the people that are making decisions of what's the impact of that. And one of the things that you can do as Scrum Master is help the team tell a story about what's really happening. Yeah, we all want to deliver it, but
I think for me, the probably more interesting question is why would you go with accumulating technical debt? What kind of definition of done you have? Because definition of done is something which you must have. You know, what Scrum Guide does not tell you what definition of done should be, but what Scrum Guide says that they want you to have a good quality. Yeah. So it's up to the team to decide what's the minimum set of things which they need to do to have that each implementation really had good quality, and stick with that, because you are fluent in that, not when times are good. You're fluent in that when the times are really tough. And if you're, for example, you write your integration tests only when you have time, not when there is a pressure, in that case, integration tests are not part of your definition of done. So I think that's probably more interesting question, because I always get question, do we need to do code review? Do we need to write unit tests? Do we need to do that? How we explain this to the customer? What kind of impact that has on our budget? What kind of impact has this on our time scale and that kind of stuff, you know? And that's probably one of most, as Miljan said, was most difficult question to answer, because, you know, client really, if you talk to client, does he really care about what engineering practice he's using? No, I don't think so. He really cares about having a good product which brings the value and has good quality.
Yeah.
So I'd add that everything both of you said, and then make all of that as visible as possible, so that if the organization is making that decision, maybe they took that as a decision at the beginning and you had a very direct conversation with them and they said, nope, this is a decision. Okay, then how can I make all of the risk as visible as possible on a daily basis? So the bug count, the, you know, things that they would understand. I almost said lines of code, but often that's not going to matter to them, but things that they will understand, and helping them to see your definition of done. And, you know, in a typical project, this is our definition of done. And we can compromise that for what? Like, you're going to see all of these things go up, like bug count. Is that a risk that you're willing to take on? Because they can, at a certain point, pivot or change their minds. Like, even inside of a sprint, they could say, okay, we see your point, let's take on less, like, and have it be higher quality. So visible, visible, visible.
Yeah. Most people confuse, like most people think technical debt is an IT problem. It's a business problem that essentially business doesn't understand, and IT has a very bad ways of explaining that. And that's because of the silos where we come from. Hey, IT thing, you know, you're responsible for IT related stuff. We're responsible for this. Whereas most companies are becoming technology driven companies, business needs to understand and have awareness around, you know, things like that and decisions that they're making. So ultimately, all of this stuff in reference to technical, that is a business problem.
Yeah.
I would add to that it's very difficult to explain benefit of removing technical debt, but you can explain very well penalties. And that's why business, I agree with Miljan, that business needs to be aware of that. You know, how much Does it cost them having technical debt? And at the same time, technology really needs to explain what's the current cost, how much will cost removing technical debt, and what kind of benefit, what will I will gain if I do that, you know. And it's tough. It's really tough challenge what Miljan is saying. I actually agree with him 100%. It's not just technology issue, it's everyone issues, you know, if you have a problem with technical debt. But let's be honest, most companies do have that problem.
Yeah,
The
and the
question
way
is,
that I explain it is think of technical debt and innovation. So if you're not addressing technical debt and in innovation like automation, things like that, you're slowing down. So if you're just adding feature or doing, you know, maintenance, I just tell people like you're actually slowing down. So as much as, you know, and if you want to speed up, you gotta, or if you want more, you gotta address the technical innovation and technical debt. So
Yeah.
you decide, right?
one thing which I must admit, which annoys me, is because I'm reasonably old. I was an engineer in 19th last century. You know, we were talking about all these engineering practices in the time. Now these days we talk about modern engineering practices. You know, this has been known for many decades.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, it's not something which is invented by Agile. It's good old software engineering. And I absolutely agree with you. You know, if you don't have this kind of culture of using this technical engineering practices to control your, let's say, your technical depth in some way or quality, you know, you would really struggling. Maybe not at the beginning, but at some point you will pay the price for that, for sure.
Yeah. And what I'm seeing also in organization, I'm interested to see if Melissa and Zoran are seeing the same thing, but now in organizations, they're hiring people in business with IT expertise. And even like in one organization that like it's a large insurance company where they hired essentially somebody above the CEO that reports, and they're almost like, you know, technology chief officer, which is an interesting trend, as many companies, including that one, said, you know, we're no longer an insurance company, but we're an IT company that sells insurance. So there's this drive and need for people in the business to actually understand technology and make better decisions based on that. So
cool.
I just want to add to this. I work in Barclays Bank in 2010, one of the biggest bank, and one of the sentences which I was using exactly what Miljan said. You're not longer banks, you're IT who sell banks product, and they were very extremely annoyed with that statement until a few years later when CTO comes and say the same thing, and they said, you know, we are IT company who's selling a product. And I think majority of companies these days with technology going in that direction. So what that means, you really need to adopt some of the practices and mindset and culture of IT companies, and that's why it's important that you understand that. Of course, keeping your own you know, uniqueness which you have as a company. So I'm not surprised that you have that experience, because I had this exactly the same, particularly in the big corporation.
Yeah, I wanted just to focus on these two questions, but for the first one, because it's about how to help teams stay focused and keep rhythm in this situation with the virus and remote work. So I do believe that we are all new to this thing, unless you were already working with remote teams. So maybe we can leave that question. I would like for all of us here, both you guys listening and the panelists, to share our advices how we deal with this situation now. So maybe because it's a broader topic, maybe okay, you guys have some things to say, but I will see to add all of the attendees in some group, or I will see how we will deal with that. So we can all share how now we are dealing with this situation when we are all at home and working remote. Do you have something just to add to this? Maybe some interesting view of this, how we can be better in remote work now?
So I'll start. We can't pretend like things are the same as they were a month ago. our organization, I can say, you know, I think we felt paralyzed for the first week or two. And ironically, we actually worked from home on Fridays every week. So we probably had a more seamless transition than most. It wasn't the remote working though. Like that's not the only variable here. Like the entire world is upside down from where it was a month ago. So to pretend like we can just keep doing what we've always been doing is probably not true for most. But we can look at it as an opportunity. You know, we need to kind of grieve some of that stuff and just like feel it for a minute that like, man, everything that we thought we were doing this sprint or next sprint is probably gone. Like we're probably doing something different. And then look at it as like, wow, like we have an opportunity to be in service, you know, and every team, regardless of what your product is, regardless of what your company is, every team has an opportunity to be of service right now in some way or another.
Yeah.
I would say that the empathy is now even more important than before. I think we really need to understand that some people really cannot take this the same way as probably other people. Interesting things which I heard. For example, my daughter just jumped in. I wanted to come in the room, and I was kind of pushing hands, go, and she doesn't understand. You know, for her this is kind of. So if you have children, you know, and this is another thing, you know, and the other thing, someone complained that, oh my God, I'm doing much more work than I used to do because I'm all the time with the computer, you know, so I have nothing to do. So I go and you know, do certain things. I heard some interesting story about someone saying, you know, we had the sprint, we had sprint goal, and over a sudden someone come and say, oh, by the way, there is a requirement to support some company in regarding something related to coronavirus, what we should do. And I said, oh my God, is it really a question? You should really stop everything and do that, you know, that kind of thing. And I think there's a confusion about remote work when you have distributed teams and having remote work when you have a kind of co-located team, because we are now in virtual world, you know, and it's an interesting opportunity for some company to really test that idea. Melissa was saying they have Friday, for example, day working from home. You know, interesting question is, did you ever measure, are you more productive, or is it kind of benefit from the company and that kind of thing, you know? So this is maybe interesting opportunity. But having said that, we really need to be careful, because some people, hopefully not many, can be personally affected by this, you know, their families, so need to really show lots of empathy and sympathy, you know, for that in that situation.
Yeah. I will. I will.
Everything that Zoran said. I would also say, like, you know, I would start with empathy first, like Zoran, but like also how we communicate and collaborate. I think as coaches and trainers, we've been challenged in the sense, like, how do we do things that we're so comfortable doing in person online? So I know a lot of our peers have been kind of trying different things out. Right. So when it comes to communication and collaboration, you know, how do we help teams try new things and say, like, you know, are we just resorting to an easy way of communicating, or by sending emails, or are we actually, you know, leaving our video on, right? Are we trying, you know, new, maybe online whiteboards, whatever it is, new tools that we might not be as comfortable, but let's try it for a week. Asking people, you know, what is the focus? I've moved in my apartment probably from 5 different locations, and I've woke up, you know, multiple different times from, you know, 4 a.m. to 7 a.m. to figure out how can I focus with, you know, I have a 3-year-old son, and you know, when is the best and optimal time for me to work? So I think, you know, experimenting, understanding, like, what are the key things that go into, you know, helping us each focus, and also as we collaborate, what are the best ways to collaborate at different times? Sometimes sending email is fine, but sometimes maybe, hey, Melissa, do you have time just to jump on a quick call? No, Miljan, I'm making dinner, or whatever, right? Okay, you know, text me when you have a few minutes. Things like that, being more open and adjusting to the times. So I think.
Yeah. I will most definitely be adding all of us in some group or whatever. We will see how we will figure it out. I really want you all to share your experience, how you deal with this situation now. So I think it will be really helpful for all of us to hear different approaches, as we said so far, and probably there are a lot of more which you found out. We will be answering all the questions if some were not answered. As I mentioned at the beginning, we will be answering all of them like after with emails. And let's just, because there are a lot of people who are not Scrum Masters now, I want to become one. I want to be the last thing that we talk about is, what would you recommend to people who are just starting as a Scrum Master or want to become one? So what are essential for beginners? We will also share some maybe advices, some links, some books that you can read, but what you guys can tell and recommend to people who are in this position now.
Think twice. I'm joking. Okay, I'll do. I mean, you have this incredible sources of information like Scrum Alliance. You can go on Scrum.org. There are plenty of Scrum Inc. There are plenty of websites which you can really find lots of interesting information, lots of interesting blogs. I mean, I'm a big fan of Mike Cohn, so lots of books from him. But one book which I certainly would recommend is Essential Scrum from Ken Rubin. I think it's probably one of the most comprehensive book to read. And fortunately for someone who starts, certification is very important, but it's just a starting point. You really need to start gaining some experience, learning, trying to put in practice whatever you heard, whatever you learn. I mean, to be honest, you need to start probably failing certain things and learning from that. So fail fast, learn fast, improve fast. That's the thing, which I would say.
Yep.
So things like this, for one, just community and, you know, talking to others, sharing your experiences. Going way back in my career, I actually was practicing as a Scrum Master for 5 years before I actually went to a certified Scrum Master class. So while certification is not the end all and be all, I can tell you that walking into that class and being with others who had the same challenges as me, and having someone like a certified Scrum trainer there to go, yep, I get those challenges. Here are some, you know, ways that you might solve those challenges, was pivotal for me. And I learned some, but it was actually more about the people I met. Like, I am still friends with people that I met in my CSM class. And that was longer ago than I'd like to admit.
Yeah, and just finding a mentor. I've said, and I've extended my help to this community. Feel free to connect with me online. Feel free to shoot me an email. I'll tell you if I'm busy enough, I don't have time, but I truly try to help, especially being from that region. I'm working with several people at any given point to help them. So it's more like finding people that are truly passionate about this stuff and want to learn is the toughest piece, right? On an ongoing basis. If you're really willing to learn and you want to dive deeper into this, I'll find time and I'll find ways to help you out. So, and there's a community of others that, you know, probably, I'm speaking for myself, that I've coached and helped, that are willing to help others and pay back. So yeah. I've also included a list of, I haven't updated in a while, but list of resources like books and things like that. And also at the bottom of that document, there's a link to Agile Pain Relief or Scrum Pain Relief from, our friend Mark has all kinds of resources. So if this is not enough, then just go to the bottom of the page and click on the agilepainrelief.com. As both Zoran and Melissa said, it's a starting point, but it's how do you actually start putting this into place and start practicing. So You can't learn skiing by reading about books. So.
Okay, thank you. We will be sharing also some recommendations how you can learn more about Scrum, Agile, and how to start doing what we now talked about. There are a couple of more questions, but I would leave them so we can answer them later on with mail. I think the time is enough for today. Thank you all for listening. Thank you all for participating in this with our first Agile Afternoon panel. As I said at the beginning, we will be doing this once per week now, and I hope that you liked this one and that you will like others as well. Next topic will be something about products, something about product owners. So we will be sharing also that information with you. And I hope, again, you liked it. I would like to thank Melissa, Zoran, and Miljan. Thank you really, guys, for joining us. It was really lovely hearing you. And I don't know if you want something to add for the end, or just say bye to everybody here.
Stay healthy.
I would like to add that the Mourinho is not the greatest coach, is Jurgen Klopp. So you never walk alone in this as well. And stay at home. And let's hope that these things will soon disappear.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Stay safe. And thank you once again. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.